through the spinal cord all the way up to the level of the somatosensory cortex. So again, we have my somatosensory tract comparison here. And what would this part be? Yeah, that's your thalamus. And this guy in the back? Cerebellum. And again, this is just a frontal section. Okay. Looking at the uppermost portion of the brain stem, that would be your midbrain. Middle piece is your pons. Okay. Lower is going to be your medulla. And then finally you have your spinal cord. Okay. And previously we had talked about the two main somatosensory tracts that are involved in receiving information from the environment and bringing them up to the somatosensory cortex. Can somebody tell me one of those? Yes, let's start with STT, the spinothalamic tract. And what I like to do, so that you can see things crossing over and that everything's really clear, I always like to make little dots here in the middle. So that'll indicate the right and the left side. And you'll see things crossing over. There we go. Okay. And so if this is the back, that means that this side is the right side and this side is the left side. So I'll just go ahead and label that. Okay, so this is going to be the right, and that's going to be the left. Right? Yeah. Okay. So let's go ahead and start out with the spinothalamic tract. As I said before, in the dorsal root ganglia, we have this first order neuronal cell body hanging out there, and it has dendrites that go out into the environment. When thinking about the STT, or the spinothalamic tract, it's going to be responsible for receiving certain sensory information. What does STT carry? Good. Perfect. Crude touch, pain, and temperature. Okay, so spinothalamic tract, dendrites, first order neuron. Like I just said, this is your first order neuron. First order neuron. Neuronal cell body sends out an axon that we talked previously that synapses with the second order neuron in the spinal cord. And I'll write that down. Here's your second order neuron. Okay, and since it's a second order neuron, what happens? Anybody remember? What does second order neuron axon do? Yeah, they decusate. They cross over. So it's going to decusate at the level of the spinal cord. Like I said, this is just a great big overview again. So we're just looking at what happens with STT. Second order neuron decusates to the opposite side. So information from the left side of the body decusated over to the right side. And then that axon is just going to travel up through the spinothalamic tract that we looked at before and head all the way up to the level of the thalamus. Okay, in the thalamus, this axon is going to synapse with the third order neuron here. This is going to be your third order. Okay, and that third order neuron is going to send out an axon that's going to synapse here in the somatosensory cortex, or the postcentral gyrus of the parietal lobe. So I will say somatosensory cortex. All mean the same thing. Yes, post-central gyrus is your somatosensory cortex, resides in the parietal lobe. So this is just a quick overview of looking at the spinothalamic tract. And I started out on the left side with the spinothalamic tract, so to make it easier to see, I'm going to start out on the right side with DCML. So DCML is a little bit different, right? So I'm going to have first order neuron with the stalk, pseudounipolar, and the dendrites. Here. This is going to be dorsal column medial lemniscus, or DCML for short. Okay. And what kind of information is carried by DCML? Fine touch. What else? Yes. Perfect. Fine touch. Proprioception. And vibration. Okay. So in comparison to the spinothalamic tract, it's going to be more like a superhighway than a country road. Okay, the spinothalamic tract is a lot slower, but the DCML pathway is a lot faster. The neurons are highly myelinated, not marinated, and axons are going to come in from this first order neuron, enter the spinal cord. Okay, does anybody remember the name of the tracts they travel up? Yeah. Let's talk about it. Something in the dorsal column, right? This is dorsal column. So they travel up the dorsal column. We'll talk about more details later. And they go straight on up to the level of the lower medulla. Okay. And that makes, this is the first order neuron. At the level of the lower caudal medulla, they synapse with the second order neuron. And since it's a second order neuron, what does it do? Yes. Second order neuron sends out axons that decussate to the opposite side. And then those axons travel up through the rest of the medulla, through the pons, through the midbrain, and they synapse with a special nucleus here in the thalamus. Okay, so this is your second order neuron. And then here at the level of the thalamus, synapses with your third order neuron. That third order neuron sends out axons to that somatosensory cortex. Okay. Similar to what we, yeah, Sam?
So, with the thalamus has like that, the way it's drawn up has like 3 little sections.
Yeah.
So where that third order neuron is located, does matter, or is it?
Yes, it matters.
Okay.
We'll get there. It's in the ventral-posterior lateral, VPL, the thalamus. So I draw it like a peace sign with 3 different quadrants because all the nuclei are located in discrete compartments. And when you look at it under a microscope, it sort of looks like a peace sign a little bit. So there's different compartments, whether it's anterior, posterior. You know, we'll get there. But you just need to know, for the purpose of this, when we get there, that both of these tracts are going to synapse with a nucleus that's in the ventral posterior lateral portion of the thalamus. We'll get to that. That's a detail. We're going to do all the details today. More than you ever wanted to know, I know. But any other questions? Okay, great. So this is sort of a quick and dirty review we had talked about before. Now I'd like somebody to tell me how these 2 pathways are different. That's right, different over here, or differ. How do they differ? How many ways these pathways differ?
Decussation.
Decussation, what do you mean by that? They both decussate.
Just one's, in the medulla. And
Yes.
one's not.
STT decusates in the spinal cord, and DCML decusates in the medulla. Good. How else are they different? Mild, yeah, you can. I said that, but yes, they are. STT is a lot slower, so the DCML has more myelination. Has, let's say, increased myelin. Great. Yeah.
So I know it just may look like a thing, but different locations where they enter into the thalamus, just because the one's on top or bottom, or maybe I'm nitpicking.
Yeah, no, they're both going the same thing. I just, yeah, but it's a good observation. I'll take it. Yeah, Spencer.
What was that last point?
Oh, DCML is highly myelinated. It's a very fast system. You're gonna perceive it like that. The STT takes a little while to get there. So different myelination of the tracts. Yeah, Alex?
Where in the spinal cord they travel, or just
Is it different where they travel in the spinal cord? Yes, because the DCML travels in the dorsal columns, and the STT, do you remember where the STT travels? Anterolateral. Yeah, it's that little tract in the bottom. We'll draw it later, but anterolateral. So yeah, so tracts reside in, I'll just put in the spinal cord, or try to. That's where they differ. I'm sorry?
Is lateral column for the STT?
Anterolateral. Yeah, the STT is in the anterolateral column, and the dorsal column in the lissus travels up the dorsal columns. Yes? Ian?
So say at the bottom tracts, what on spinal cord? The last bullet.
Oh, tracts reside in the spinal cord. They differ. They reside in different places. So DCML tracts are going to be in the dorsal columns, and SCT is anterolateral. So that little tract at the bottom encompasses both. Anybody else? Yeah?
What's above that?
Differ. So it says STT is, so they differ in that the STT decusates in the spinal cord, the DCML decusates in the medulla. Okay. The DCML has more myelin, increased myelin, so it's a faster system for transmission, signal transmission. And then the tracts reside in different places in the spinal cord overall.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. How else is there? Is anybody think of one more way that they differ? Yeah.
They're in different parts of the thalamus when they hit. Is that?
Yeah, no, that's just the drawing.
Oh, okay.
There's, yeah, no, they actually both go to the ventroposterior portion of the thalamus. We'll get there later on. There's one that's pretty obvious. So how about what do they carry? Are they the same or different?
Oh, they're carrying different sensations.
Yeah, different sensations. So they'll just put, they differ in the sensations they carry. Okay. A lot of good points. All right, so they're both somatosensory tracts, but they differ in just a few ways. And then, how are they the same? Let's put same down here. Anyone think of a way that they're the same? Yeah.
They're both a 3-neuron system.
Yeah. 3-neuron system. Perfect. First order, second order, third neuron. 3-neuron system. Excellent. Yes. Yes, they both go to, yes, travel, both end. And actually, they end in the thalamus. That's why they're, but let's just say they both will terminate in the somatosensory cortex. Anything else? How else are they the same? Yes. Specifically, what decusates? Yeah. Second order neuron decusates. Anything else? One more big thing I'm thinking. I'm not be able to see it up there, but they all somatic sensation goes to the thalamus. Okay, I think that's important. All but one thing. There's only one thing that doesn't make it to the thalamus, and that's olfaction. Kind of an important point if you're working with a patient post-brain injury. But all somatosensation goes through the thalamus. So the thalamus is a major sensory processing nucleus. So I'm just going to say they both go to thalamus. Okay. Clear as mud. Oh, I hope it's okay. Okay, big overview. Let's go ahead and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this DCML system and I'm going to look at it first in very fine detail. Okay, and I'm going to break it up into different parts, and we're going to start down here at the level of the spinal cord. So the next one that you're going to look at is this one's called dorsal column medial lemniscus with the two spinal cord cross sections. Okay, I'm choosing to start with DCML system because it's a little bit more complicated. So I always like to get the hard stuff out of the way first. Okay. Now this is nothing more. This is the transverse section of spinal cord in two different places. And I like to put two up here to start with because I want to say that this one is down here is representative of anything below the level of T6. And we started talking about this a little bit last class, but now we're going to go into more detail. So this one's going to be representative of below T6, and the one above it is going to be, this one is representative of T6 and above. So T6 level plus everything above it. We're going to start here below the level of T6. When I think below the level of T6, you're here approximately. So a lot of your lower extremity. Okay. Now we talked before about some tracts that were involved in transmission of DCML information below the level of T6. And those tracts, what color do I want here? I'll choose, I think I used blue in this one. And I think I put the most medial here, so this is duplicated. So you see something like this. Okay, and these are nothing more than tracts that carry DCML information and the name of those tracts, present bilaterally. By tracts, I'm just talking, this is just a bundle of axons traveling all the way up to the brain. These are known as fasciculus gracilis, F-A-S-C-I-C-U-L-U-S, gracilis, G-R-A-C-I-L-I-S. So fasciculus gracilis present there bilaterally. Okay, and then we know that for DCL and ML information are all somatosensory. You have your neuronal cell body here sitting in the dorsal root ganglia with the dendrites here coming out into the environment. And DCML, we know, picks up fine touch, vibration, and proprioception. But below the level of T6, we're going to be thinking this information is coming mainly from the lower extremities. Okay, so it's really coming a good portion of your trunk as well. But when we test proprioception, we're not really testing trunk as much as we test lower extremities. Okay. And what happens that we've seen before with the DCML, the neural cell body has axons that come in through the dorsal root, travel through the dorsal gray horn, and then they're going to hit their tract and then immediately ascend up. Okay. And I can draw it in for completeness, but the same thing's going to happen on the other side. So as your neural cell body sitting here in dorsal root ganglia, comes in through the dorsal root, travels through the dorsal gray horn, and then hits the tract, fasciculus gracilis, and then travels up the spinal cord. Okay, and this would be your first water neuron. Okay. Like I said, yeah, Hannah.
Is the lower extremity for all three of those things, or is it
Yes.
just the proprioception?
Nope, yeah, they all travel together.
Okay.
They all, you can't separate them. So fine touch, vibration, proprioception are all going to travel together. And below the level of T6, if you think lower extremity, you're doing good. Okay, now, this is below the level of T6, coming up T6 and above. Well, T6 and above still has fasciculus gracilis here. Bilaterally. Alright, so fasciculus gracilis is still there. Okay, but since we're at the level of T6 and above, we're also going to add in that other tract that carries DCL information that resides in the dorsal column. It's called fasciculus cuneatus. Sometimes it might be easy to confuse the two, where gracilis is and where cuneatus is. And the way that I remember it is when the information comes in, it populates medially first. So the lower extremity information is going to populate, go medial, but that's all taken, so then upper extremity has to go more lateral. Okay, if that makes sense. So gracilis is more medial, cuneatus is lateral, because as you ascend the spinal cord, there's not enough space left medially. And the same thing here for fasciculus cuneatus for the T6 and above. Here's my neural cell body with dendrites coming out. And I'm going to come in through the dorsal root, through the dorsal gray horn, and then ascend here bilaterally. And this is going to be, this is carrying fine touch, vibration, bless you, and proprioception. Mostly from the upper extremities. This is above the level of T6. And realize that, the fasciculus gracilis from here to T6, this is all just axons going straight on up. So this is still coming up. These are just nothing more than axons traveling up through the spinal cord. Okay, so I'm just connecting the lower levels with the upper levels. That information is coming from below. Questions? That make sense? See it? This building, yeah.
So in that lateral dorsal column and like the below C6, there's nothing just in there?
Nothing there. Yeah, it's kind of, it expands as you go higher. Okay, I'm just keeping the cross section simple. Yeah, there's nothing there. Yeah, Spencer.
I don't know if this is what you said, but it's just asking
Yes.
Yeah, that's not below.
It's not below the level C. It does not exist. I'm keeping my cross sections consistent to make it easy for you guys to see. But essentially, this is kind of squished, so there's nothing there to populate it. Okay? It starts to expand. Other questions? So yeah, communiatus only exists above a level of T6. Yes?
Is that also the first order?
Yep, that's first order neuron. Everybody got it? So this is where we're starting. Yeah, Braden?
The areas that you have on the facilities, is that coming from the lower?
Yes. Yep. So all those are myelinated axons filling up that tract. All the myelinated axons coming from below. So you travel up the spinal cord, populate the entire area. It's coming from below. Anybody else? Is it clear? Eric, Neil, did you have? Sorry. You look like a student we had years ago. His name was Eric, so I apologize. I know you're Neil. All right, there's one more thing I want to add, and that's, so way back when, I think it was, second class period, we're talking about the vertebral arteries coming up and then, coming to pontomedullary junction and then forming the basilar. But off the vertebral arteries, that first shoot, does anybody remember what's formed off the vertebral arteries? The very first thing that we talked about? I'm sorry?
Pontes?
No, coming back down. Anterior spinal artery, awesome. So what happens is that anterior spinal artery comes down and resides right in this space. So if you remember, this space is called the anterior median fissure because it's so big. This is where that anterior spinal artery comes back in. So that's your anterior spinal artery, and the anterior spinal artery, like I said, supplies 2/3 of the anterior portion of the spinal cord. So if I had to draw, I'm just going to put in red dots here, all the area that's being supplied. So it's all of this, all of these tracts, all of the lower motor neurons, everything's being affected here. So this is the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord that's being affected. Okay. So ASA is the anterior 2/3 of the spinal cord. What's not affected? So one of the most common places to have a spinal stroke, you can have a spinal stroke, is in the ASA, the anterior spinal artery. What's not affected in an anterior spinal artery stroke? Yeah, the dorsal columns aren't touched. That's it. The only thing the person's going to have left is that dorsal column information coming through. Okay, that's just characteristic signs and symptoms. Okay. Go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this, and this is at the level of the spinal cord. Now we're just going to travel all the way up, and we're going to hit the level of the brainstem. And look at, we're going to zoom in and take a look at the DCML decussation in the medulla. And what you see here, I'm just showing this as like an open tube. This down here is just the connection to the spinal cord pictures that we just drew. So this is just, this information is traveling up the spinal cord. So it's going to be helpful. Since we're crossing over, I always like to put my dots in the middle so I know left from right. Okay, so this is going to be the right side, and that's going to be the left side. And what I showed before, I think gracilis had blue, darker blue. Yes. Gracilis I had in darker blue, and that's going to be the most medial. So all I'm doing is I'm continuing from below, okay, and I'm going to, coming up the spinal cord, this is going to be the fasciculus gracilis tract. It's going to synapse here in the lower medulla. And then this is going to be more laterals. This is going to be my fasciculus cuneatus tract. These axons are just traveling up, and they're going to synapse here in the caudal medulla. once we get the first order neuron, neuronal axons all the way up, they're going to synapse with their specific nuclei. And it's super complicated, I can tell you, because the fasciculus gracilis is going to synapse with the nucleus gracilis. And the fasciculus cuneatus is going to synapse with the nucleus cuneatus. And that's going to be your second order neuron. So here's this guy is your nucleus gracilis. Okay. And this is the fasciculus gracilis traveling up. Okay. And then this nucleus is the nucleus cuneatus. Okay. That's that simple. So gracilis is more medial, cuneatus is a little bit more lateral, both part of the dorsal column system, travel up to the level of the caudal medulla, synapse with their respective nuclei. Fasciculus gracilis synapses with nucleus gracilis, fasciculus cuneatus synapses with nucleus cuneatus. And those are the second order neurons. Okay, so since they're second order neurons, what do you think their axons do? Decusate. They're going to go. Okay, they're going to go to the opposite side. And what happens is that the fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus tracts, once they synapse with their respective nuclei, the decussation becomes one tract. Okay, they're going to come and have a tract together, and that tract is going to ascend all the way through the midbrain. That's the third cranial nerve, and then continue to travel up. Okay, and when they travel together, both of these, they were lower and upper extremity tracts, but now at the level of the medulla, they're traveling together as one tract, one special tract. Does anybody know what that might be called? Yeah, what? No idea. You do, you know.
It's got a name. I was looking at it.
Of course it has a name. Dorsal column is where we started. This is the medial lemniscus. Yep. This tract is now the medial lemniscus. Now you know why it's named. This is going to be your medial lemniscus. This tract. Medial lemniscus is nothing more than the combination of upper and lower extremity information that was combined after it synapsed with the nuclei in the medulla. So this is your medial lemniscus. Lemniscus. And remember, lemniscus is nothing more than a bunch of myelinated axons traveling together. So now you know dorsal column medial lemniscus, where it comes from. Okay, there's only one more thing to add, just one small piece, and that is anytime something decussates, we usually have a name for it. It's called something. This particular decussation, which is right here, okay, and that's the decussation of axons from nucleus, gracilis, and cuneatus. These are known as internal arcuate. A-R-C-U-A-T-E, fibers. And internal arcuate fibers are nothing more than the decussating axons. They just form a structure that's visible under a microscope. And somebody named them internal arcuate fibers. That's all that is. Okay, so information that was previously from the left side of this person's body at the level of the caudal medulla gets transferred over to the right side of that person's body. Yes?
What did you say the internal arcuate were again, the joint?
They're just they're the decusating axons from the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. They're just they're visible under a microscope because they're a bunch of white matter crossing over. Somebody called them internal arcuate fibers. Okay, so now we're on the right side of the person's body. Okay? And then we're going to move on up. So this is at the level of the midbrain. Okay, so here's my third cranial nerve. This is that part of the ventricular system. What's the name of the ventricular system piece in the midbrain? One of my favorite landmarks. That's going to be your cerebral aqueduct. I'll even write it in there. This guy is your cerebral aqueduct. When you see your cerebral aqueduct, you know you're in the midbrain. Okay, so it's going to travel. Medial lemniscus is going to travel up through the brainstem. Okay, and then we're going to look at where it's going to travel in the thalamus. So, again, this is my midbrain. Yeah, this is my third cranial nerve right here. It's a nice marker. Ocular motor. Okay. This is the ventricular system we talked about before. Which ventricles are these here? Yeah, they're my lateral ventricles, right. And then what's the name of the ventricle that's between the two thalami?
Third.
That's the third ventricle. And here's my cerebral aqueduct. Okay. And this is the thalamus. These other structures are actually nuclei. They're part of the basal ganglia system. So, caudate, putamen, not really important, but you should just know that these are just nuclei that we will discuss later in the semester that are part of the basal ganglia system. So you have your thalamus, and then there's going to be this space between the basal ganglia, the ventricles, and the thalamus. So where we were is we had the medial lemniscus was traveling up through the level of the midbrain, and it's gonna synapse here in the thalamus. So here's my medial lemniscus. Okay, medial lemniscus is going to travel all the way up to the level of the thalamus and then synapse here on my third order neuron in the thalamus. And I'll label that here. This is my third order neuron. And like I said before, I mentioned that the third order neuron in the thalamus that the DCML is going to, or the medial lemniscus is going to synapse with, resides in an area known as the VPL. VPL stands for ventral posterior lateral. And that's just talking about the position of the VPL nucleus in the thalamus. It's in the VPL. So it's ventral, it's posterior, and it's more lateral.
Sorry.
Mhm.
That's the two little triangles on the side are called the VPLs.
No, the VPL is the area where this third order neuron resides.
Oh,
Yeah.
slice of the pie.
These are actually,
Oh, that's what you were saying. Okay.
yeah. So these are actually part of the basal ganglia system. I'll label that here. We'll get to them eventually, but we're not there yet. These are all basal ganglia here, and then these are your ventricles. Okay, so that's a little bit more clear. Yeah?
And
So does, like you were saying earlier about the dorsal ganglia, is it a ganglia a different type of matter from what it's surrounded by?
So, a lot of people argue that the basal ganglia should be really called the basal nuclei because they're gray matter in the CNS. Okay, so if that helps, yes, you're absolutely right. A ganglia is typically reserved for the PNS, but for some reason somebody named them basal ganglia. You could also think about them as the basal nucleus, basal nuclei, and you might see it listed as either or. And most people say basal ganglia. Okay. Pretty good? Okay, so what happens is this third order neuron comes out and goes through a special space. There is this space here that resides between the basal ganglia here and the ventricles, right in this region here. Okay, the space is nothing more than just a space that's between the basal ganglia and the ventricles. It has a special name. It's called the internal capsule. So I've indicated in yellow here. It's just the space. So this is the internal capsule. Okay. So the third order neuron in the VPL of the thalamus sends out an axon, goes through this internal capsule region, travels all the way up to the somatosensory cortex, delivering fine touch, vibration, and proprioception information to the somatosensory cortex. And again, this is the right side, and then this is the left side. Yes, Gabby.
What did you say the internal capsule satisfied, the sac tissue?
So see that there's a space here, the yellow space. I've labeled it as yellow. It's nothing more than the space between the ventricles and the basal ganglia. So this is your lateral ventricle. Coming from the thalamus is down here, and it's going to always travel in a special space.
Okay, and then on the side, I see you have the arrows. What's the looking for that?
Basal ganglia. So the basal ganglia. So this is the caudate putamen. So these are all part of the basal ganglia system. We'll talk about it later. That these green are the ventricles. Anybody else? Probably more than you wanted to learn about the DCML system. This is the fine detail, though, right? So, let's go ahead and beat a dead horse while we're here. And let's look at the DCML tract all by itself one more time in its entirety. We just went through that whole thing, so let's go ahead and label that middle here for DCML. Okay, and like I said, this is more complicated of the two. So you have, so I think the color is below the level of T6. Let's just say that right here is T6. So below the level of T6, you have your first order neuron here. Thank you. First order neuron coming in below the level of T6. This is going to come in and then travel up the fasciculus gracilis tract in the spinal cord. And it's going to synapse in the level of the caudal medulla. Okay. Yes, Hannah.
So this is the whole thing we put together?
This is it. Whole thing we just did. We'll talk more detail again. Okay. So this is DCML information, which is fine touch, vibration, proprioception. Yeah, the more times I say it, the more you're going to get it. So I like to do a little overkill. So below the level of T6, you have fasciculus traveling up, fasciculus gracilis. Okay, above the level of T6, and that's going to travel all the way up through the medulla. And then above the level of T6, we're going to be here. same information, but this is going to be fine touch, vibration, proprioception coming from the upper extremities. It's going to send out an axon that comes into the spinal cord and then immediately goes all the way up to the level of the caudal medulla. And that's going to be your fine touch, vibration, and proprioception. And that's mostly from the upper extremities, if you're above the level of T6. Now, what's the name of the nucleus that fasciculus gracilis synapses with at the level of the medulla? Yeah, nucleus gracilis. Good. Nucleus gracilis is here, and fasciculus cuneatus synapses with nucleus cuneatus. Yes, so this is going to be, here's my first order neuron. This is going to be nucleus cuneatus, or my second order neuron. And then this is fasciculus cuneatus. And lastly, this is nucleus gracilis. Okay, now, yes?
Are fasciculus cuneatus and fasciculus gracilis the first order neurons? That's like their proper name?
They are the first order neurons.
That's
Yeah.
what, okay.
That's what that, there's nothing there but axons coming, they come straight up. They don't synapse anywhere until they get to the level of the medulla. Okay, they don't synapse in the spinal cord. They come in the spinal cord and they go right up the tract. That's why they're so fast. Okay, and then axons coming out of fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus, they're second order neurons. They decussate to the opposite side. And then they travel up one great big tract. What's the name of that tract? Anybody remember?
Medial.
Yeah, medial lemniscus. This is going to be your medial lemniscus right here. Great. And then, oh, those fibers also, when they cross over, when they decussate, they have a name. Does everybody remember the name? Internal, good, internal arcuate fibers. Okay, and they're going to travel up as medial lemniscus, and they're going to synapse in on a special nucleus and a special portion of the thalamus. Which portion of the thalamus? Oh, Alex? EPL, yes.
But, does it matter where you're drawing the third order neuron in the thalamus every time?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. You should just know that it's in the VPL. Yeah, it might be just a little. Okay. Any other questions? So it's going to synapse in a third order neuron. Here's my third order neuron that resides in the VPL. That third order neuron is going to send out axons that are going to synapse here with the somatosensory cortex. Okay, so lots of repetition. The more times you say it, the more times you look at it, the more times you draw it, the easier it's going to be to remember. This is a big point that you need to know your tracks. DCML is a big one, SCT is the other one. Any other questions? Yeah, Ian?
The part where they join together, does that say internal?
Arcuate, A-R-C-U-A-T-E, internal arcuate fiber. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So 2:02, because we went a little bit over that.